The following podcast is a W2M Network original production. Visit W2Mnet.com for all of our other great podcasts, plus news, reviews, articles, and opinions from the worlds of wrestling, video games, football, and entertainment.
Hello and welcome to another Fantasy Football to the Max, the NFL Week 5 recap, review, fantasy edition here. And of course I am not Randy Isbell, I'm Sean Garmer. Usually you hear me on the other football podcast. Randy's still not back with us yet, and Gary is not going to be with us either because he's on a cruise this week. But thankfully, Mike, of course, is here, one of the regular hosts. Mike Mitchell, how you doing?
Good, man. Hope you enjoyed your team's performance this weekend. They looked very good. Dak Prescott trying to keep Tony Romo from getting his job back.
Yeah, he certainly is. That I've seen that debate raging again all over everything that I'm watching. Just crazy to me how this. I just don't think they're even going to debate it, even if they were to go 7-1. It's one of those things where they're paying Romo too much. I just can't see them sitting him.
No, I don't think they'll sit him either. But it does bode well for the future, so at least you got that going for you.
I mean, it's not like your Steelers did any. They did pretty well against Randy's Jets. So
they did. It's too bad he's not here, so I can't give him some crap about it.
I kind of feel bad for him though. He's got the injury. Injuries to Decker, and at least Brandon Marshall played it well. But it was always going to be a tough road to hoe with this early season that they had, this early schedule. So they're kind of done with it now, though. So hopefully they can start racking up wins.
Yeah, we'll have to hop in on that here in a little bit.
But let's get things. Well, we probably should start with the Monday night game here since it just ended. It's kind of an ugly game. 3 turnovers for the Panthers, along with Derek Anderson throwing an interception in the end zone. They probably would have won them the game considering how things were going. I don't really know if there's a whole lot of anything you can take out of this fantasy-wise. Even the kicker couldn't freaking hit.
Yeah, but at least he hit the one at the end, so he redeemed himself a little bit. I thought there was a little bit of interesting fantasy stuff. The stuff I saw, for one, Charles Sims has been placed on the injured reserve, and Jacques Rogers got 30 carries tonight for 101 yards. His average wasn't all that great, but the volume was excellent, and he had 28 yards on 5 catches out of the backfield on 6 targets. That was second on the team. If Doug Martin was to miss another week, I think Jacques Rogers, considering how much opportunities he got, might be somebody that you would consider adding. And as of right now, he is the handcuff to Doug Martin.
Yeah, I mean, they made a statement at the beginning with like 6 carries right at the beginning for him, and they were trying to do everything they could to make sure he got the ball, as evidenced by the 30 carries, as they should, really, because that's kind of what you've been able to do against the Panthers defense, wear them down. And on the other side, the great thing about having a backup quarterback is you usually can count on your tight end to do bonkers numbers, and that goes along with Greg Olsen getting almost 180 yards. It's pretty much the only guy that Derek Anderson could find all night. Derek Anderson had 278 yards. That means that Greg Olsen accounted for everything but 100 yards of that.
Yeah, he had 181 yards. Kelvin Benjamin got 70 yards, so if you go past those two, there's not even 30 yards left. The interesting thing here was Cameron Artis-Payne had 18 carries for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that's an over 20-point night for anybody who had Cap going tonight. So that was the bright spot along with Greg Olsen on their side of the field. Just quickly back to Tampa Bay. Mike Evans, he put up the numbers you would hope he would, 89 yards and a touchdown. It's a good night. Cameron Brate only had 3 targets. He had 1 catch for 38 yards and nothing else. Curious because he was a hot waiver wire option if this is just a blip and he's still going to be somebody that people can count on, or is this what we should have expected from him and maybe he wasn't worth picking up?
I don't know. It's a weird thing with Cameron Brate because he's kind of up and down. Last year he had the same thing. He had games where he was really good, and then games where you wouldn't hear from him. And this is kind of one of those times where he just didn't appear much.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a bad game all around. Really, it wasn't really a joy to watch.
No.
For either side, I thought both quarterbacks kind of struggled. Winston didn't make any mistakes. He did have a fumble, but they got it back. He didn't throw any picks, but kind of an unexciting 18 of 30 for 219 yards. Right now, I would have a hard time recommending anybody starting a Derek Anderson or a Jameis Winston going forward.
Yeah, I definitely say that's a true thing right now with Winston. Winston has worse games than this. So the track record really doesn't speak for a reason to start Winston other than unless he's like the only QB that is starting left. You have him and you need him for a bye week or something. Other than that, I don't know why you would.
Then, you probably can find somebody better. I think the interesting take out of this game, just to conclude it, is the actions of Cameron Artis-Payne and Jacques Rogers going forward, both of them behind running backs who are expected maybe to be back next week or the following week. So just keep an eye on it, folks.
Yeah, certainly. Jonathan Stewart hasn't even played the whole year, so that's something to think about too, because he's got injury issues and he could easily be injured again. So you want to make sure you keep Cameron Artis-Payne. Don't let him go once Stewart comes back if you have both of them. So
yeah, I agree.
We move on to the Tom Brady show. The dude is out. He says he wishes he would have played more in the preseason. I think he's just talking semantics at this point because he goes out there, 28 for 40, 406 yards and 3 touchdowns. Martellus Bennett gets the beneficiary of most of those.
All of them, actually. I had him on my fantasy league, and I started him this week.
There you go. Smart man. Gronk back sort of to himself, and Chris Hogan having a day as well. Do you think, I have Chris Hogan in a couple leagues. I've had to start him sometimes even when Tom Brady wasn't around because I had injuries that happened in other places. Do you think definitely now he's a guy you pick up off the waivers?
I think he's certainly worth a stash. I don't know if we can be 100% sure that he's going to take off, but when you have Tom Brady as your quarterback, just about every one of the mouths on that team gets fed. You have angry Brady. He's going to throw 3 touchdowns every week, basically going forward. If he throws less than 2, I'll be shocked, to be honest. He's that good. That team is that good. And if Chris Hogan is your number 2 wide receiver on one of the best offenses in the league, especially with those tight end threats they have, someone's going to be open on every play on that team, and I would certainly want to have a Chris Hogan somewhere either on my bench or even consider starting him because there's a good chance that he's going to perform at a high level going forward.
Yeah, certainly. That's a thing you need to keep an eye on because I think I remember hearing in preseason that Tom Brady was a big fan of Chris Hogan, and now he's finally getting to work with him. So, and you know what you're getting eventually with Julian Edelman and Danny Amendola, but just having another target for him doesn't hurt.
Yeah, and if your nickname is 7-Eleven because you're always open, that's a good nickname to have.
For sure. I mean, so are you more confident in Gronk now after this game that he's backed himself?
Well, I mentioned to Randy a couple weeks ago that this could turn into the old Aaron Hernandez / Rob Gronkowski show with Martellus Bennett there. And nothing that happened in this game makes me feel any different about that. Gronkowski still had 109 yards. He didn't find the end zone. Martellus Bennett was 67 yards and 3 touchdowns. Just out of the tight ends right there, you've got well over 30 points between the two of them, and 15 targets, 8 for Bennett, 7 for Gronkowski. Other than Julian Edelman, those two guys were the top targets on the team, and I would be surprised if they don't run as many two-back sets as possible. It just opens up so much for them as a team to have two great receiving tight ends that can make big plays, because it gives them more blocking power, too, when they want to run the ball.
Yeah, exactly. That's very true. They didn't run the ball too much in this. Blunt only gets 37 yards and a touchdown, still about 9 points if you're standard league, which isn't too bad. Obviously, you've been expecting more from him lately, but this was kind of bound to happen when you have Brady coming back wanting to show he still got it.
Yeah, and we talked about it, or I mentioned it a couple times that once Brady comes back, Blount's production is likely to go down. There will still be certain matchups where New England thinks that they can shove the ball down another team's throat. If the team's poor against the run, Blount's going to get his carries. But he is relegated from what was a clear RB1 with Brady out to now an RB2 or a flex play, in my opinion, just because the Patriots are a 60-40 passing team when Brady's there and a 60-40 running team when he's not. So with Brady back, that's going to eat into Blount's production. James White had 89 total yards. He didn't find the end zone, but a reasonably productive day. He has a little bit of potential going forward until the return of Dion Lewis. Between now and then, he might make a good flex play just because of the fact that he fills that role as the receiving running back.
And for Cleveland, Isaiah Crowell pretty much got shut down. The one bright spot is Gary Barnidge, which, anybody really hasn't said his name much this year. 76 yards on 5 catches. Cody Kessler did have to leave the game after the first quarter, which that presents another issue in itself. I mean, anything really to take out of this for the Browns?
The Browns should not offer any insurance policies to any quarterbacks that play for them. That's just a losing proposition. And if you're playing quarterback for the Browns, take out as big a policy as you can find. Take out 2, 3.
Who the hell's left for the Browns? You got McCown?
Charlie Whitehurst.
You
can't stop Charlie Whitehurst. You can only help to contain him.
You can't stop Charlie Whitehurst from making money. That's for sure. That dude, seriously.
It does create a little bit more interest in Terrell Pryor, because now Pryor is back to the second quarterback. Basically, he did actually have 3 attempts in this game. He only completed 1 for 5 yards, but. Look, there's a good chance Charlie Whitehurst proves to be ineffective, which only helps Terrell Pryor's potential of being listed as a wide receiver on your fantasy team, but playing at quarterback and giving you points from all different ways. And there is a lot of value in a player who kind of does it all. So it will be interesting to see if Kessler can, A, come back, or B, can Whitehurst play well enough to maintain the job, or C, Terrell Pryor comes in as a wide receiver and ends up playing quarterback.
Yeah, and then you could get even more points potentially if Pryor ends up playing quarterback. How would they do that if you got him listed as a receiver for that game and then he starts doing things as a quarterback? Would it just not count as points, or?
They still give you the points. They just list him as a quarterback. You know how if a team runs a running back option pass type thing, and that guy completes it for a touchdown, you still get a quarterback score for any plays like that. The difference here is that Pryor could have huge volume in the passing game versus just a one little trick gadget play pass. Pryor could end up playing as a quarterback, even though he should still be listed as a wide receiver, because we don't know what Cleveland's going to do going forward. They don't want him to be their quarterback. That's obvious, or else he already would be. Even though he was a quarterback at Ohio State, they don't. That's not how they have him in their plans. He's there to run a few gadget plays, a little wildcat here and there. But as the emergency quarterback, and with them just repeatedly burning through quarterbacks every single week, there's a good chance he ends up playing quarterback for them for a half or even an entire game.
Yeah, I mean, all it takes is Charlie Whitehurst getting knocked out of the game, and there you go. Not
or just playing terrible.
Yeah, or playing terrible. That's another thing, which that wouldn't take much, considering the Browns' offensive line and everything else. But we move on to the Philadelphia Eagles suffering their first loss of the year to the Detroit Lions after a interception by Carson Wentz, which is what actually causes the game to end, with Darius Slay picking it off and Matt Prater hitting the field goal that made it 24-23 as well with like a minute 28. But Theo Riddick getting 2 pass touchdowns from Matthew Stafford. Obviously, he's benefited from Abdullah going down.
Yeah, he has. They don't necessarily want to lean on him as the go-to running back. They kind of wanted to work Zenner in there a little bit more, but Zenner had 7 carries for 9 yards. He was completely ineffective at that position. Theo Riddick at least gave them the dynamic of having the ability to average more than a yard per carry. But he's not an every down back. His design is to be the receiving back. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do going forward. With Washington going down for them, now they're pushed back even further as far as who they have at running back. And right now, it's looking like the Detroit is going to run for the sake of running, but for the most part, they're going to want to throw the ball more.
Yeah, and on that end, Ryan Matthews also gets a pass touchdown. He gets about around 50 or so yards rushing, and so he has a productive day. I mean, he doesn't go over 100 yards or anything, but still gets you some points.
Yeah, 75 yards total from scrimmage and a touchdown. That's a good effort. And Wentz threw that interception, which basically sealed the game at the end. But he still was pretty effective, 238 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. He pitched in 14 yards on the ground. Not a terrible effort on his part. I actually mentioned to a friend of mine, Jamie, I'll give her a shout-out, that I thought that the Lions had a good chance to win this game, and they did. So shout-out to her, pat my own back. That's just kind of the way the game went, and Detroit built up a lead. Philadelphia managed to rally all the way back, but then Detroit came out and made some plays at the end. We mentioned Golden Tate in our last broadcast, and he had a grand total of 45 yards. They didn't throw the ball a lot, only 25 attempts by Stafford, but only 39 yards receiving for Golden Tate. I still have him in the drop category, although with all the damage that's happened to their running game, I could see where somebody could make an argument to keep him around. He just hasn't done anything in 5 games.
Well,
now.
To be fair, their leading receiver was Anquan Bolden, who only got like 3 more yards than him. So I don't know if you can really count on anybody in the Lions other than Theo Riddick at this point.
I think Marvin Jones is still a reliable option. He had way too big of the first few weeks there to just scrap him. But he really is about it. Even their tight end situation right now is just all matched up with Ebron being hurt. The only receiver that I could recommend to anybody starting in that group is Marvin Jones.
Yeah, he got the only receiver touchdown from Matthew Stafford, so he at least put 6 on the board. I think he got 37 yards, something like that. So
yeah, he got 9.7. I mean, that's not great, but it's serviceable.
Right, and Jordan Matthews on the other side was the leading receiver for Philadelphia. Obviously, he's the lead guy there as receivers go. So I don't know that you're starting every week, though, right? He's kind of one of those bye-week fill-ins.
Yeah, at this point, it's hard to say. This was a good matchup going in. I actually thought Jordan Matthews might have a better effort this week, but he didn't. And that's despite Wentz throwing 33 times and then trailing. Wentz spread the ball around to 8 different guys. So right now, there's nobody that he is just really leaning on as his go-to guy. And as long as that's the case, it's hard to start any of those wide receivers.
Yeah, very much the same case. And Darren Sproles didn't have the biggest of games either after he's been doing well for the Eagles in that department. So something to look for there on that end. Wendell Smallwood, I thought, played decently as well. So still going to be kind of a give and take committee thing with those two.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. Smallwood didn't get on the stat sheet this week. Ryan Matthews is still the go-to guy. Darren Sproles is a spot starter as a flex if you need one. But other than that, I don't see anybody else you could start except maybe a Wentz in the right matchups too, or a bye-week quarterback.
Well, we move from there to the Chicago Bears taking on the Indianapolis Colts team that had to be tired after traveling to London and deciding to not take the bye week like Jacksonville did. It paid off for the Colts as they win 29-23, getting their second win at home. Andrew Luck going over 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, only to be outdone by his counterpart on the other side, Brian Hoyer, almost 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. Neither one of those to Alshon Jeffrey. So if you're a Alshon Jeffrey owner like I am in a couple of leagues, that's probably upsetting to you. Cameron Meredith was actually the one that benefited the most. 130 yards in one of those touchdowns. Crazy.
It is crazy, really, because he kind of came from out of nowhere as far as people knowing who he was or what he was capable of, or, he doesn't have much on the career stat list as far as, other than very, very minimal returns. But here he is with, Kevin White going down again for the season. This is 2 seasons in a row now. Cameron Meredith is a name to watch, and he had 12 targets for that 130 yards and a touchdown. And if Alshon Jeffrey is not going to be the go-to guy and Cameron Meredith is, then that's certainly somebody you'd want to consider to have on your team. And, hey, look, Hoyer has played very well since taking over for Cutler after Cutler's injury. And we mentioned this a couple weeks ago that there was a good chance Hoyer would not give that job up when Cutler came back. That's what the Bears were saying, and he hasn't in any way shown that he should give that job up. 397 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was kind of a spot starter for a lot of people this week that had bye-week fill-ins. We weren't sure with Kevin White going down if he would be able to find another receiving option, but there's Cameron Meredith from out of nowhere. So I think Cameron Meredith is probably going to be added to a lot of teams this week, and it's one of those deals where if you've got the space to take a chance on a guy, he might be worth taking a chance on.
Yeah, especially because Eddie Royal did play in this game, but he was also banged up. Alshon Jeffrey's been sort of one of those game time decisions for the past couple of weeks. So Cameron Meredith, kind of like the only receiver they got that's not injured at the moment, and he's benefiting. So it may not be just a 1 week thing. Obviously, it helps to play the Colts, who can't stop anyone. But it's not like the Bears were stopping anyone either. This was a game of whoever had the ball last was going to win. And that was kind of the situation here with the Colts, is Andrew Luck got a big 35-yard touchdown to T.Y. Hilton, who was pretty much the main contributor in this game. It's been T.Y. Hilton and almost nothing else for Andrew Luck. I mean, Is that how you feel about that? I can't trust any of these
It
other
is.
receivers, really.
To this point, that has been exactly what has happened, and I have Andrew Luck and T.Y. Hilton on my fantasy team, so I love it. I'm not going to lie. I'm double dipping there, and I'm enjoying every moment of it. That's 2 weeks in a row where T.Y. Hilton has put up big numbers for me, and not surprisingly, I've won both of those weeks. So, yeah, we expected Philip Dorsett to step up in lieu of Dante Moncrief going down. He hasn't really done it. Two catches for 26 yards on only 3 targets. T.Y. Hilton led the team with 11 targets. The next 2 highest targets were Dwayne Allen and Chester Rogers. So it is T.Y. Hilton and Andrew Luck's show right now, and it's hard to recommend anybody else in that receiving group to depend on as the go-to guy. And, Jack Doyle and Dwayne Allen have kind of been alternating decent weeks. One of them seems to be getting a touchdown every week, but you don't know who it is. And it's hard to recommend one of them when, you could get a Jack Doyle's 2 catches for 8 yards kind of day out of either one of those guys.
Yeah, that doesn't really sound like great. A guy should be sitting there risking on my fantasy team at this point when you need points from everywhere. Speaking of getting points, though, if you had Adam Vinatieri, you got some major points, especially if you're in one of those leagues where if they kick more than, if you get 5 for a 50-yard field goal because he hit 2 of those, so the old man still got it.
Is this where I admit I have Adam Vinatieri on my fantasy league as well?
Jeez.
I had Andrew Luck, T.Y. Hilton, Adam Vinatieri, and Frank Gore going in this game. I know it's a lot of guys to have in one game, but I liked the matchup, and it certainly paid off.
Yeah, jeez. Probably got, 50 points from, or more from all 4 of those guys?
From all 4 of those guys, I got over 70 points.
Jeez, you go in a league just with that in some games. Jordan Howard, still the man, talking about guys that are not going to, we talked about Jay Cutler. Jeremy Langford might be finding himself riding the bench with Jordan Howard getting a pass touchdown and 118 yards.
Yeah, there's no might be about it. We've been warning, Randy and I have been warning since the preseason that Jeremy Langford's job was tenuous at best. Jordan Howard has gotten his opportunity, just like we thought he would, and he's played very well, also like we thought he would. And I would be shocked if Hoyer or Howard yield those positions back to Cutler and Langford, respectively, going forward, because neither one of them deserves to be benched at this point. Jordan Howard has been very, very good, and I would be shocked if the Bears turn away from him going forward.
Yes, he has been. I don't know with Cutler though. He's being paid so much. I wonder if he whines enough to where, or maybe he doesn't care because he's that kind of guy. Sometimes you get the feeling that maybe he just doesn't give a shit. But it's one of those things. We'll have to see when that actual time comes for Cutler to be healthy again, and they make that decision. But
yeah, I think the only guy.
Go ahead.
The only guy in Cutler's corner would be Alshon Jeffrey, really, because he's the guy that it seems like his numbers have been depleted. Everybody else's numbers seem to be going up. And right now, it's hard to say that Brian Hoyer isn't their best chance to win a football game.
Yeah, it's really similar to what the Cowboys face is. The only guy that could really complain about anything is Dez going with Romo, but everybody else has benefited from Dak Prescott being in there. So, not that they don't benefit when Romo's in there either. It's a much different case than Cutler, but it is it's a similar thing with your Levi receiver wanting the main QB in there. But Chicago loses, and we move along again to the Dolphins losing at home after Hurricane Matthew didn't do much to the southern part of Florida, so they played the game there. The Tennessee wins 30-17. Marcus Mariota has himself a day, 3 touchdowns and another one on the ground. This is the kind of performance you're looking for out of Marcus Mariota. DeMarco Murray continues to do his thing, 121 yards, and Delanie Walker finally back into fantasy relevance.
Yeah, Walker was dealing with some injuries a couple weeks ago. He didn't have the greatest game last week. I think he was still banged up. He's the go-to guy there, really. He had 8 targets. The next highest was DeMarco Murray with 6. Rashard Matthews did find a score late to kind of put that game away, but he and Tajay Sharp each only had 4 targets. There's nobody in the receiving corps right now for Tennessee other than Delanie Walker. And listen, we talked about this, you, Gary, and myself, going into this game. I told you I liked the Titans in this game because I thought they would run the ball down Miami's throat. They carried the ball 41 times. I think they ran the ball down Miami's throat for 235 yards, I might add. DeMarco Murray with 27 carries, 121 yards. He chipped in 16 more yards receiving. It was a textbook Tennessee game where they matched up well against a team on the ground, and they basically just force-fed this game to Miami, and Miami couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, and Ryan Tannehill, once again, just a pretty terrible game. 2 interceptions, can't even get 200 yards passing. Man, I don't know what to. It's sad because I have Ryan Tannehill in a couple leagues and I have to start him. But it's like I already know. I just don't know what to expect from the guy.
I think you can expect to see him in the waivers in 99% of fantasy leagues going forward because there has to be a better option right now than Ryan Tannehill. And, he's got Devontae Parker there. He's got Jarvis Landry there. He has some weapons on that team, but they just can't seem to get anything clicking. They don't have a running game right now. Maybe if Arian Foster comes back, that gives them a little bit more of a threat. But, we don't know when Foster will come back, and if he does, how long it'll be before he goes down again, because, like I told Randy a few weeks ago, he will go down again. That's what Arian Foster is now, unfortunately. He's a marvelous talent that can't stay healthy. For me, just about everybody on Miami is a dumpster fire, except Jarvis Landry. You could make a case for starting him under the right circumstances, but you just can't trust anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, because Devontae Parker, same thing, where he at least got to 7 points in this game, but a lot of times he can wind up doing nothing, and it's only Javon Landry and hardly anybody else. And that was the difference between the Dolphins last year and this year, is when Lamar Miller was actually given the ball and he could run, they played well. But when you're one-dimensional, it makes it really easy, especially for a defense like Tennessee's, to come in and just barrel them down. I don't know if there's anything else as far as fantasy-wise for either team, unless you got something here.
Well, just real quick, Derrick Henry did get 7 carries in this game, which is an uptick from what he saw previously. However, that was based more on the fact that all that Tennessee wanted to do was just run and run and run. DeMarco Murray is still the go-to guy in that backfield. And as of right now, the 50-50 split that we had worried about going forward doesn't look like it's going to happen. So you got to keep Henry as a handcuff, but Murray is definitely the guy to start every week.
Certainly. Something to keep your eye out on as far as if you're a Derrick Henry owner hoping that the carries will come. I don't think that's the case. And we move along to the Washington Redskins getting a win away against the Baltimore Ravens. Neither quarterback had a day to really speak about as far as, one of those like where they get multiple touchdowns or whatever. But they were efficient enough. Kirk Cousins throwing another interception there. Terrence West almost gets 100 yards again, so that's good on his part. Matt Jones has another one of his stinker games. And Pierre Garçon finally shows up on some kind of fantasy relevance.
Yeah, well, Pierre Garçon, I think, is an anomaly. I've never really liked that guy a whole lot. Part of that is because I drafted him a few years ago and basically dropped him midway through the season. He hasn't done much in these games. And listen, we expected Deshaun Jackson or Pierre Garçon or even Jamison Crowder to start emerging as a guy that Kirk Cousins likes. But, Jordan Reed is the guy that he throws it to. 11 targets, the next highest were 7 for Jackson Garçon. It's hard to even recommend any of these Washington receivers as a reliable starter right now with Cousins, A, spreading the ball around so much, and B, Washington's not trailing or throwing the ball as much as they were before. So they're a little bit more balanced. Kirk Cousins had 41 passes in this game, but like you said, he spread it around a lot. And it was a lot of dink and dunks. There wasn't a lot of efforts to throw up the field here. So as of right now, the Washington receivers, you almost have to put them on suspension.
Yeah, that's one of those things. It almost seems like it's a different Washington receiver every week. Jamison Crowder did get the big punt return, so if you're in a league that allows punt returns and you started that guy, you got something from that. But that's the thing. Like 1 week it's been Crowder, 1 week it's been Garçon, 1 week it's been another guy, and you're just kind of like, well, I mean, what do you do here? They don't have a set person that you can rely on. The same thing with, well, at least for this week, it kind of went with Crockett Gilmore getting the 1 touchdown, but Wallace still got the most yards.
Yeah, the only go-to guy for Washington, just real quick to close that out, is Jordan Reed. And anybody else right now is start at your own risk. But, yeah, moving over to Baltimore, Mike Wallace with 11 targets, 63 yards. Washington is a vulnerable defense, so, Flacco put the ball up 47 times. They were also trailing going into the fourth quarter, so they started to have to throw a lot more. And, they haven't worked out their running game yet, but this is 2 weeks in a row that Terrence West has put up some good numbers as a running back. And we all thought when Kenneth Dixon came back that he was going to be the guy that they would lean on a little bit more. And maybe they're just working him into the offense, but 3 carries for -1 yards, not an impressive debut for Dixon this season. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. I think, personally, if you've got Terrence West, you got to keep him. And if you stash Kenneth Dixon, kind of see how things go over the next couple weeks and then maybe reevaluate from there.
Do you think eventually we'll see Kenneth Dixon be the guy that they're hoping he is?
I think that's what Baltimore wanted from him. And like I said, maybe they're working him in slowly. This week didn't show us much. It did show us that Terrence West seems to be at least somewhat relevant in that running game. They've been a team to just completely avoid from the running back position. But as of right now, Terrence West is almost meriting starting status until Kenneth Dixon starts to show more of a reason why Terrence West should be in splitting carries with him. And, Javorius Allen's trying to get back into that flow a little bit too. So I think West is the one guy you could consider as a flex play, and I would just avoid the other guys until we figure more out.
Yeah, and I mean, for the Ravens, I guess it's one of those, with Flacco, you kind of have to just hope for the best, because sometimes he'll give you good weeks, sometimes he doesn't.
Yeah, and Steve Smith going down early in that game too, that didn't help anything. He's listed as questionable with an ankle injury, so keep an eye on him. He started to look like the Steve Smith that we had grown accustomed to with Joe Flacco, and even before that when he played with Carolina as kind of the go-to receiver there. But him going down, he has a little bit of a penchant for injuries, so keep an eye on him. But I do expect if he comes back that he's going to be the go-to guy in the receiving corps.
Well, if we don't have anything else here, move on to Minnesota being the only unbeaten team in the NFL after they demolished the Houston Texans 31-13. Brock Osweiler with a paltry 184 yards. He does get a touchdown, but he throws another pick. Sam Bradford, who's usually a pick machine, has not been making mistakes. 271 for 2 touchdowns, exactly what you want out of him. And Adam Thielen has a career day. I wonder who picked him up in fantasy, honestly.
Yeah, I'd be surprised, really, if somebody didn't take a chance on him with Diggs being out. He had a chance to step up and be the go-to guy. And hey, Cordarrelle Patterson, who was 2 years ago, he was supposed to be this wonderful sleeper that everybody thought was going to be great. He actually showed up with a touchdown this week and 46 total yards. I'm still not sold on a Thielen or a Patterson. It all comes down to Diggs for me. What I do think that Minnesota wants to continue to do is run the ball with Asiata, with McKinnon. Asiata 14 carries and a touchdown. McKinnon 20 carries. Neither one of them were that impressive. Between them, they only had 91 yards on 34 carries. But Minnesota has such a good defense that the onus on this game is to just not turn the ball over and let that defense give them great field position, cause turnovers. They hit Osweiler 14 times in that game, sacked him 4 times. That defense is the way that team is constructed right now. Bradford's only asked to just not make any big mistakes, and he's done that to this point. But as far as the receivers go, I think Kyle Rudolph had a little bit of a quiet game. Part of that could be because of the matchups and the Houston linebackers, but I think he still warrants a start going forward. Stephon Diggs is a kind of wait and see, and if you've got McKinnon or Asiata, they might be worth a flex play, but I don't really trust a lot of the offensive pieces that Minnesota has outside of Kyle Rudolph.
Yeah, Houston, DeAndre Hopkins does get a 1-yard touchdown really late that didn't matter. But, garbage time matters in fantasy, obviously. Is this one of those, like, you just throw it up to, okay, you're playing the Minnesota defense, try again next week with the Texans players?
Well, I'm not sold on Brock Osweiler, and Randy and I have brought his name up a few times that he has been very unimpressive, and that shows in guys like a DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins has some of the best hands in the NFL, but teams just double him and take him out of the game. And as long as that's the case, we have to wait and see if someone else will step up. Will Fuller got banged up in this game, and he left early. Only had 4 yards. It's kind of DeAndre Hopkins has dropped down to wide receiver 2 and almost even a flex play with Osweiler struggling like he has. And a lot of it is because Lamar Miller has not emerged as the guy they thought he would. Everybody was really high on Lamar Miller coming into the game, but it just hasn't happened yet. He only had 8 carries. He had 4 yards receiving. A lot of it is because Minnesota's defense is so good, and they got so far ahead. But still, you were expecting Houston to lean on the run a little bit more, and here's Osweiler throwing the ball 42 times and only completing 19 of them. Not a very good effort, and not the style of game Houston can afford to play and expect to win.
Certainly, and Alfred, to your point, Alfred Blue was the lead run man, 39 yards. I mean, not helping Osweiler at all, and Lamar Miller just nothing on that end. I mean, they took the running game out of it. That's what Minnesota does. They tried to force Osweiler to have to throw it, and they knew that was a problem for him. And this is why you win that big, when you capitalize on somebody's weakness at this point. Obviously, Minnesota defense, you want, if it's out there on the waiver wire, I would pick it up.
Yeah, there should be no possible way that they're out on the waiver wire. But yeah, if they are for some stupid reason, pick them up.
Another team, actually by the same score, 31-13, your Steelers. beat the Jets. Ben Roethlisberger throws for almost 50 times, 4 touchdowns, and 380 yards. My goodness, you were a big fan, Big Ben, if you had him in your fantasy. Le'Veon Bell, obviously they passed the ball a lot more because the Jets are pretty good at stopping the run. Sammy Coates, the beneficiary of that, almost 140 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I was talking about Sammy Coates before this game started. That we thought Sammy Coates might be the guy that's stepping into that number 2 role, and it certainly appears that is the case going forward. Marcus Wheaton, who was slotted in the number 2 spot for the Steelers, only had 2 catches for 19 yards, was basically very quiet in this game. But Coates, Bell, and Brown all had 11 targets. Antonio Brown still had 78 yards and a touchdown. But, Sammy Coates has amazing speed. He has average hands at best. He dropped a wide-open touchdown, and he had another drop that was, so his hands issue is still something that needs to be worked out. But there's no questioning the fact that he can get open and get open deep. And Roethlisberger is looking for him, especially early in games, to stretch the field.
And you talked about Jesse James actually had a pretty decent game as well. He's kind of been one of those, you don't know if you need to start him this week or not, but it's a good sign.
Yeah, he's been a spot starter here and there, 43 yards and a touchdown. That's all you could ask for from a tight end. What's really going to be interesting here is Ladarius Green is expected to be back in 2 weeks. At least that's what they're hoping. And if he comes back, he has a lot more athletic ability than Jesse James, can also stretch the field, and he's just going to add another weapon to that Steelers arsenal. And he's a guy that you probably, if you're struggling at tight end a little bit and you have the roster space, you might want to take a chance on Ladarius Green and add him to your lineup.
On the other end, Matt Forte also doesn't do a whole lot because the Steelers did a good job of stopping the run there. So Fitzpatrick has to throw almost 40 times. Yeah, he does get the touchdown to Brandon Marshall, who gets 114 of his 255 yards. Obviously, Brandon Marshall, the guy you're starting right now for the Jets, along with, up until this game, Inua was a guy you could probably start. But once again, at least a better game from Fitzpatrick this time.
Well, the stats show that he didn't throw a bunch of interceptions, but this was kind of a grinded-out game until the fourth quarter where the Steelers took control. The problem for the Jets was they couldn't get off the field. They couldn't get any pressure on Roethlisberger. They only hit him once the whole game, and it was a sack, but that was it. He sat back there and had time to just pick them apart, and he did pick them apart. So it forced the Jets to go into more of a throw mode late, and the Steelers do have a good running defense. It was just kind of an anemic effort, really, for the Jets, and I felt like the Steelers kind of let them hang around for 3 quarters and then put them away in the fourth quarter. Aside from Brandon Marshall and his 15 targets, there really wasn't a lot else going on in the receiving corps. You did bring up Enunwa, who we mentioned as an ad. He's kind of a spot starter here as long as Decker is out and maybe a flex play. 51 yards, not really all that big of a deal against the somewhat suspect Steelers secondary. So, I have concerns going forward for a lot of these Jets guys outside of maybe Brandon Marshall and Matt Forte. It would be hard to make an argument to be able to trust to start any of these other guys other than if Decker comes back.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be hard because, Anua's been okay, but outside of that, you don't really know who you're trusting. Forte's obviously had a couple games where he was great, but this kind of wasn't a game for him, and at least you got something out of Marshall. But it's going to be this way for the Jets, I think, for a while. Just at least Fitzpatrick didn't, just throw this game away for him. In fact, I think Todd Bowles made a bad decision on a certain drive that could have helped the Jets, where he probably should have gone for it. But it is what it is. This time those coaching decisions don't always go your way. The Atlanta Falcons deliver probably the surprise of the entire weekend with a win over the Super Bowl champion Broncos. They go to 4-1 and 3-0 away from home to beat the Broncos 23-16. Not any gaudy numbers from Matt Ryan, but efficient, and Tevin Coleman certainly the beneficiary of this. 132 yards through the air.
And the touchdown. I was kind of excited to see Devontae Freeman getting 23 carries. Now, we did bring up the sickle cell trait that Tevin Coleman had. That could be part of why the split wasn't so even. 23 for Freeman, 6 for Coleman. They may have just kind of been trying to keep Coleman from getting in any sort of bad situations or too winded. So Freeman with 88 yards and a touchdown, another 35 through the air. Coleman with 31 yards running and 132 and a touchdown. Both of those guys, again, against who many feel is certainly probably the best defense in the AFC at least, if not in the NFL. Those two guys produced yet again for fantasy teams, with Tevin Coleman 163 total yards, Devontae Freeman 123 total yards. They both had a touchdown. That Atlanta rushing game is for real. And this coming with Julio Jones doing next to nothing, 29 yards. Mohamed Sanu actually had 43 yards. If Denver took away the passing game, but they couldn't take away those running backs. And I almost feel like, if you've got one of these two guys, it would be hard to bench them, even when they're going to be splitting time.
Yeah, it's one of those pick your poison type deals. Like the Broncos decided, okay, we have good corners enough to take care of Julio Jones and Mohamed Sanu, but the rest of the guys just didn't know how to deal with Tevin Coleman getting all these big long runs, because he's only got 4 catches and he got 132 yards out of it. But and Devontae Freeman being able to offset that as well running. Just that's a really hard combination to stop. And, they proved it here against a defense that I think also what hurts, we have to remember Gary Kubiak left the game, their coach, being sick, and he's actually not going to coach on Thursday either in their game against the Chargers. So Joe DeCamillis is going to be the coach there. So, and having a rookie quarterback like Paxton Lynch, who did decently, but he showed that he's a rookie, certainly.
He did. He struggled. He wasn't making a lot of plays downfield. And to Atlanta's credit, they brought the house on him a lot. They sacked him 6 times. They hit him 10 times. They kind of put him on his heels a little bit. He still managed to find the guys that you would want to start. Emmanuel Sanders with 80 yards, Marius Thomas with 49 yards and a late touchdown to kind of salvage his day. But, Atlanta dominated this game, really. Denver put up some late points to make that score close, but really Atlanta led throughout, and they just looked like the much better team. Part of that, I think, definitely does need to be attributed to Lynch. C.J. Anderson, only 41 yards against that somewhat suspected Atlanta Falcon defense. I'm not sure.
That was probably a case of, we're just going to make sure we stop C.J. Anderson so that Paxton Lynch has to beat us kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he only had 62 total yards. It makes me wonder, maybe Atlanta's defense is a little bit better than we gave them credit for. But that offense right now, the 23 points on the road against Denver, it doesn't sound like a lot, but the way that they scored them and the fact that they were up 20-3 after 3 quarters and just kind of ground the game out in the fourth quarter, I am impressed with Atlanta. I'm impressed with Matt Ryan being able to play at least a solid, consistent game. Nothing flashy, but this was the game where everybody thought, okay, Matt Ryan has been playing over his head, and now he's going to fall off a cliff. He didn't fall off a cliff. And with those running backs that are, they're two dual talented. Both of them can run and both of them can receive. This Atlanta team, they're dangerous right now.
Yeah, and they get to show it again against the Seahawks next week. That should be really interesting going forward for them to see if they can do this again. That being said, Denver Broncos, I already mentioned Gary Kubiak not going to be the coaching, but Trevor Siemian is going to be back at quarterback. But are you does it worry you at all going against a Chargers team that also can put up points on a Thursday? That maybe the Broncos are in for possibly another tough game?
I think San Diego has been tough for everybody. The problem with San Diego is they are their own worst enemy. I mean, they have just given away game after game after game after game after game. And if I was Denver, sure, I'd be worried because San Diego's proven they can play with anybody. The question is, can San Diego take care of their own business? And, yeah, going forward with Simeon back, I think that makes a difference. I think that helps their confidence. It certainly helps their passing game, which in turn will help their running game. And, let's face it, that defense got a little bit embarrassed in this game against Atlanta. And Atlanta putting up, that 23 points, that's more than Denver's given up all season. And, I would expect that Denver defense to try and be a little bit more angry coming up this next week.
Well, a team that we know is going to be angry because of what you just said. The San Diego Chargers find a way to lose again after they had a field goal to tie it, and they botched the hold, and the Raiders win. I mean, you can't script this stuff for the Chargers. You just really can't. That being said, Phillip Rivers, 4 touchdowns. He does throw 2 picks, but 4 touchdowns, 360 yards. Antonio Gates gets one of those. Hunter Henry gets one of those. Melvin Gordon gets a pass touchdown. Chips in 69 yards on the ground. And Tyrell Williams had himself a day with 117 yards and a touchdown as well. Amari Cooper on the other side finally gets on the board and looks like the Amari Cooper that you expect, especially with that 64-yarder. And Derek Carr had himself a good game as well. I mean, the shootout that you expect of both these teams that apparently can't stop people. But, man, just I don't know if I feel bad for the Chargers anymore or I just pity them.
It's almost like you're coming to expect it from them. I mean, that's kind of where we're getting to. We saw this from them last year when they were thought to be a lame duck team going towards the end of the season. And let's face it, the Chargers have suffered some terrible injuries this season, too, to key players. To their best defensive player and their best receiver both go down for the season. That's rough.
And Danny Woodhead as well.
And Danny Woodhead, he's certainly right up there with Melvin Gordon as their best running back, Barrett going out. It's rough on San Diego, and they deserve to at least have won 1 or 2 of these games that they've given away. The KC game they gave away in OT this week, last week. I feel bad for Chargers fans. I feel bad for San Diego because it almost feels like, if they could have won a couple, 2, maybe even 3 of these games they gave away and be sitting at 4-1, maybe they find a way to stay in San Diego. Maybe the city rallies behind the team and they can figure out a way to keep that team there. But with these kind of performances, people are going to gravitate away from them, and it's going to cost them in the long run. But that's a story for another show. Melvin Gordon, 69 yards. He had 18 yards receiving and a touchdown. A serviceable game, 4 yards receiving, 4-yard average, just over 4 yards. The thing is here, we brought this up, Randy and I, a couple weeks ago. Melvin Gordon is pretty much a must start every week, and it's because there is nobody else there getting any carries. Gordon with 16 carries. 3 other guys had 1, and that's it. So he is the main back. There is no pressure on him from anybody, and he is a must-start every week, even when he doesn't have very great numbers. it's just the volume alone and the fact that nobody's pushing him. He's a 3-down back right now. As far as Terrell Williams and Travis Benjamin, I like Travis Benjamin, his 11 targets. He was all over the place in that game, and Rivers was looking for him a lot. Hunter Henry with a touchdown again. Antonio Gates also had a touchdown returning from injury. But Hunter Henry kind of looks like he might end up taking Gates, more of Gates' work going forward than we might have expected prior to Gates getting hurt. We kind of thought this was going to be Gates' last hurrah, but Hunter Henry is starting to show that he deserves to be on the field maybe more than Gates does.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about this in the way before when you were talking about if the Steelers should draft a tight end or not, and I said Hunter Henry's the number one guy for a reason, and he's showing why. I mean, they lose Ladarius Green, Antonio Gates is getting up there in age, obviously, and Hunter Henry is that heir apparent, and good for him and good for Rivers to already be finding him because he deserves to get those plaudits. He's a very good passing tight end, and he proves it here. I definitely think you need to kind of keep an eye on him. If you're in one of those leagues where, maybe one of those big leagues, 14, 16 teams, where you don't get a lot of options, if he's around, you might want to go pick him up because he could be a guy you're looking at, like you said, that maybe he keeps getting a touchdown in the red zone, or maybe he gets a big game here and there. He's going to be consistent.
Right,
for
and
sure.
if Gates goes down again, which he's very likely to do, then Hunter Henry is pretty much a must-start at tight end. So, for me, the interesting thing on the Raiders side is their running game is just a garbage right now. You don't have anybody you can lean on here. After Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington, 8 carries and 9 carries. Jalen Richard, I should say. 8 carries and 9 carries, respectively. Olawale had 6 carries and the only touchdown out of the backfield. It's tough to recommend any of these guys, and we don't even know what's going to happen if and when Latavius Murray comes back. If you have any of these Raiders guys and you can find somebody to give you any value for them, you might want to go ahead and do that because this is looking like a 3-headed monster or a committee in Oakland going forward.
Yeah, even with Latavius Murray there, he gets about, 60 yards a game. And maybe he'll get you a short yardage touchdown or something, which, is still serviceable. That's 10 points in a standard league, and that's fine. But they are a passing team, and they certainly prove it every week. Michael Crabtree gets a big, usually gets a touchdown. Amari Cooper finally gets on the board. I mean, you get Amari Cooper going, they're going to be more of a passing team after this too. That's just who the Raiders are at this point. They're not making any bones about that, and I would be looking more at Raiders receivers than Raiders running backs right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we had kind of talked a little bit in the last show about Crabtree versus Cooper, who's the number one there. And I told you I still thought Cooper would be, even though Crabtree had, a couple nice games there. I think this game kind of elevated Cooper back to he's still the go-to guy there. Crabtree is a great number 2 to have, though. Don't get me wrong. 7 targets, 47 yards, and a touchdown. He had a couple terrible drops in that game that killed off a couple open drives. But when they needed him to make a big play, he did in the fourth quarter with that big touchdown. And, Amari Cooper had 12 targets, which was 5 more than any of the other guys. He's still the best option on that team. And even though Crabtree had stepped up a little bit, I like Cooper better, but don't get me wrong, I think Crabtree is a serviceable wide receiver too, or a flex play every week.
Yeah, for sure. Both of those guys, you want to be playing if you have them and you don't have anything better. So we go on to the Buffalo Bills beating the Rams in Los Angeles, one of the few times they will play in Los Angeles early in the season. The LaShawn McCoy goes off for 150 yards. Tyrod Taylor chips in with 2 touchdowns. Not a lot in the passing realm, but he gets things going there to Justin Hunter and Marquise Goodwin with the late touchdown to kind of seal the game. The big interception return for a touchdown is really what kind of did the Rams in. And Todd Gurley does get a touchdown, and he gets 72 yards, so that helps him kind of come back to being relevant again. And Case Keenum, not one of his best games. 2 interceptions, no touchdowns, gets some yards, but yeah, he was kind of shut down in this game.
Yeah, I mean, he looks more like the Case Keenum that we thought we were going to see out of the Rams. And, Todd Gurley, as you mentioned, he did get a touchdown. He did have 108 total yards, 72 yards rushing on 23 carries, but only 3 yards to carry. Part of that is, the Buffalo defense, they struggled a little bit early in the season, but they're kind of finding themselves now these last few games. They've been pretty solid against the Cardinals, the Patriots, and now the Rams. 3 pretty decent teams. Granted, these last 2 games have been against second-rate quarterbacks with Keenum and Brissett in New England. But I think Gurley I still keep waiting. When is he going to emerge? A lot of people had him as a number 1 pick, if not a top 3 or top 5 pick in the draft. And he has in no way shown that he has earned that spot. And I think a lot of Gurley owners are probably worried about him. They're happy that he at least gave him a good effort this week, but that yards per carry is a little scary. On the bright side, he did get 23 carries, which is great. That's fine. And there were only 6 other carries between everybody else. Most of those were Tavon Austin with three carries here. But going over to the receiving side, there still isn't any Rams receivers I like, nor would I recommend or would I start on my fantasy team. So, Gurley, you pretty much have to start him. He does get the volume, but he's about the only guy I could recommend starting on the Rams offense right now.
What about on the other side? You have to start LaShawn McCoy. Obviously, he's one of the studs. But Charles Clay at tight end. What do you think of him? He gets a serviceable 73 yards.
Yeah, I brought him up in the last show, saying that with Watkins going down and going on the injured reserve, that somebody was going to have to kind of fill in the void there. And Tyrod Taylor likes to throw to Charles Clay. I mean, Charles Clay he's not exciting. He's a tight end. He's got decent hands, nothing exciting, but just because they don't have anybody else to really lean on, he gets an uptick when they actually do bother to throw the ball. He gets a little bit of an uptick because there's not a lot else going on there. Robert Woods was supposedly elevated to the number 1 spot, but he only had 2 catches for 26 yards. But in all reality, Buffalo they listen to our podcast, because Randy and I brought this up a couple weeks ago, saying Buffalo needs to run the ball and run it a lot because that's who they are. That's where they're most effective. They have a LaShawn McCoy. He's a dynamic runner. And if they are asking Tyrod Taylor to drop back 30-plus times, they're not going to win football games. Thankfully, Rex Ryan listens to the show. Rex Ryan listening to the show, not guaranteed. But, they've come out and to run the ball. They've gone back to who they are. And LaShawn McCoy is an absolute running back 1. Everybody else on that team, including Tyrod Taylor, I would avoid until we see more.
Yeah, you do get the running yards of Tyrod Taylor, so if you have a bye week and he's kind of around, he may not be a bad play, I think, in those situations, especially now because in this offense they've seem to understand that he doesn't need to drop back. Not only do you give it to LaShawn McCoy, but he can take off and run in this offense a bit more than the one with Greg Roman where they did want him to be that drop back passer, which is not what he is, really.
Right. And you could make an argument for him this coming week with San Francisco. They're hosting San Francisco at home. But he is at best a matchup play just because they want to run the ball with McCoy. That's what they want to do. And that's what they're finally doing, and suddenly they've won 3 in a row.
And if you have a kicker that, maybe he's not doing a whole lot for you, Greg Zuerlein may not be a bad one to pick up if he's out there. I think he got like 5 field goals today. Obviously, that's always a crapshoot, but he's usually a dependable guy when it comes to the Rams do tend to kick a lot of field goals.
They do. I mean, that's the thing. The team moves the ball between the 20s. And Zuerlein has a big leg. There's no arguing that. And, yeah, he had 4 field goals and an extra point. So he's one of those guys. You just have to hope that the Rams don't get completely shut down, which is possible. But, yeah, they don't have a go-to red zone threat right now, and Gurley hasn't been that guy to punch it home for him. So, yeah, they're going to score a lot of field goals, and their defense is good enough to still win games even though they're kicking all those field goals. So that is a good call on your part because we don't talk about kickers much. If Zuerlein's still sitting out there, he's the perfect fit for fantasy because he's going to get so many opportunities to score points with a solid defense and a questionable offense.
That is true, and we go on to got 2 more games left to talk about. One of them is the Dallas Cowboys hosting the Cincinnati Bengals. They had a 28-0 lead. At one point, the Bengals didn't score a touchdown until about 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter. I don't think anybody called that before this game started. And the Cowboys go on to roll. Brandon LaFell does get 2 garbage time touchdowns. That helps you if you're a Brandon LaFell owner. That's the first 2 times he's gotten on the board touchdown-wise this season. He gets 68 yards passing as well. The Cowboys did a really good job on A.J. Green. He got, I think, like 50 yards or something like that. Same that Giovanni Bernard got rushing because they held Jeremy Hill in check. Of course, Andy Dalton didn't do a whole lot other than what you got to see there at the end with the 2 touchdowns he throws to LaFell. The Cowboys, Dak Prescott, serviceable. Ezekiel Elliott doing his thing, over 130 yards again with 2 touchdowns. I don't think you could ask more from that guy. And Terrence Williams, the lead receiver for the Cowboys. Cole Beasley did decently as well. It's still kind of, you don't know who you start there without Dez, but I don't know what to say. Just the Cowboys do what they do and surprisingly beat a Bengals team here.
Yeah, I think the Bengals are getting close to that what in the hell is wrong with them point. This is another poor showing by them. And let's face it, they struggled with Miami last week. They won the game by 15 points or so. They kicked a lot of field goals in that game. They had a big game from A.J. Green, but we didn't see a lot from Jeremy Hill or Giovanni Bernard last week or this week. And this was my fear going into the season. And Randy and I actually had a one of our You Betcha challenges which included Jeremy Hill. He actually liked Jeremy Hill to do better than Devontae Freeman this season, and I accepted that challenge. And I certainly don't feel any different about it now than I did then. Let's face it, Jeremy Hill is just inconsistent at best. He has those games where he puts up the 60 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he hasn't had a 100-yard game this season. I can't remember if he even had one last season. He's relegated to a low-end RB2 or even a flex play. And the same goes for Bernard. You know, when Jeremy Hill struggles, you usually figure, well, Bernard will pick it up. He did have 96 total yards between receiving and running, but he had 9 carries. Jeremy Hill only had 4 carries. As a Jeremy Hill owner, if you are one, I'm not, thankfully, but if you are one, it certainly scares me that he's so inconsistent and that he's yielding so much to Giovanni Bernard now because of that inconsistency.
Yeah, I think this was just one of those games where the Cowboys wanted to make sure that they took that running game away, and they were trying to put it on Andy Dalton, and they did a good job scheming against A.J. Green. And, I mean, they put the Bengals in a lot of situations where they were kind of 3rd and long or even on 3rd and short situations they couldn't get it through. And I forgot to mention Dak Prescott did get a running touchdown as well. So 2 touchdowns for him. with that 227 yards. That's a pretty good day if you're a Prescott. And if Prescott's still out there in your leagues, I'm telling you, he's not a bad guy to grab and just have for a matchup. If you have somebody that's like supremely better or whatever, he's not a bad bye week play, especially right now when you know he's playing.
Yeah, I agree with you. We brought him up a little bit this last week. The only concern I have with Prescott in picking him up at this point is because Romo's not far from coming back now, so you would only have him kind of as a rental for 2 or 3 weeks, and most likely just as a fill-in if you use him at all in those 2 or 3 weeks. That's not to say that Romo will come back and actually stay healthy for very long. We both know, you especially as a Cowboy fan, know that Romo is kind of a chandelier at this point. You never know when he's going to drop and shatter all over the floor. It even happens to be, I remember one of the best memes coming into the season, and then it happened in week 1, was Tony Romo laying on the ground after the coin toss. I just thought that was pretty funny. It's just the coin toss, Tony. Get up. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But like we mentioned at the very opening of the show, I think the Cowboys have to love the fact that Dak Prescott is looking like he can be the leader of this team when Romo is either A, injured and not able to play, or B, when Romo's done, which I would be almost, I'm getting close to the point of, I would be surprised if Romo even tries to play next year, because he's got to worry about the long-term health of his body. And
especially if he goes down again this season.
Yeah, he suffered so much. I would not be shocked if, him knowing that Prescott is filling in, his team loyalty that he might have, he can almost feel like, hey, they've got a guy that can take over in Dallas and win football games when I'm not here, and maybe it's time for me to worry about my long-term health.
Any take on Brandon LaFell or a Terrence Williams as far as picking them up for wide receiver spots?
Terrence Williams, I still like Cole Beasley a little bit better. Williams, he's going to have a game here and there where you think, oh, I should go pick him up, but he just lacks the consistency. It still does Bryant's job. I think if Bryant's there, it elevates Beasley in the slot a lot. I don't think Williams is consistent enough for my liking. I do kind of like Beasley as a stash and a spot player here and there, or maybe a flex player. I've never really been that big on Terrence Williams, and you as a fan of the Cowboys probably not all that big on him either. He's just always kind of lacked the ability to be consistent on that offense. But I'll tell you what, that offensive line dominated Cincinnati's defensive line, and they blew massive holes open for Ezekiel Elliott all day long. Randy and I actually had a question about Ezekiel Elliott and what running backs I would draft over him, and there was only 2. I said I would take David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell, and that's it. I think Ezekiel Elliott, he's chasing guys like DeMarco Murray for the overall lead. Part of that, I think, is because Bell, missed those first 3 weeks, or he would be right there also. But he, to me, is probably the 3rd best fantasy football back in the game right now.
Yeah, certainly. And, I think this is where, Dak Prescott comes into play, because Elliott's able to run because you have to keep an eye on Dak Prescott, whereas where Tony Romo, he's not going to run like that. He's not just going to take off. If Tony Romo scrambles because he can't find somebody to throw to, whereas Prescott might actually, even though he does drop back and survey and all that kind of stuff, he does take off and run at times, especially on that touchdown that Prescott scores. You can see Carlos Dunlap having to question about who I go after. He goes after Elliott. There's a huge hole right there for Prescott. And then on the same thing with the run that Elliott gets that 60-yarder, he's looking at Prescott the entire time, and Elliott just blows by him, and there's that hole. So, it's something to keep track of for the Cowboys if you're looking at what Dak Prescott does, not only passing, but and creating a run game for Elliott and everybody else.
Sure, and him being able to complete passes was the biggest question coming in, because if he can complete passes, then the secondary has to stay honest. They can't cheat up. They can't put 8 men in the box. Although, with Des Bryant out, I thought Cincinnati would be able to stack the box a little bit more and force Dallas to get away from the run a little bit, and they didn't do it. And that Cincinnati defense is questionable. The Cincinnati team is questionable right now, and they're sitting at 2-3. They're now 2 games behind the Steelers with a head-to-head loss. They've got a lot to fix, and they need to fix it real quick.
Yep. So the only last game we got to talk about here is the Sunday night game with the Packers outlasting the Giants. Odell Beckham does get on the scoreboard here with a fantastic grab at the back of the end zone, but Eli Manning once again has a really suspect game. Not somebody you can count on right now, I think, and I own Eli Manning in a couple of leagues. Aaron Rodgers does throw a couple of interceptions, but he throws 2 touchdowns as well. Randall Cobb, the leading receiver for the game. Eddie Lacy had to leave the game at one point, and he's a question mark for this next game that they have, but Jordy Nelson gets a touchdown, and Devontae Adams gets a touchdown for the Packers. Just at least Odell Beckham on the score sheet.
Yeah, and he made up with the kicking net, so that was good to see. And the kicking net was feeling bad, and Odell went and fixed that. So that's good to see those 2 patch things up. So good for him. And you're right, that catch in the back of the end zone was fantastic, especially him keeping that toe up and not putting the heel down to where he would have been out of bounds. That was a great catch. As far as you said about Eli Manning, Randy and I had a You Betcha challenge of Eli Manning throwing for over or under 40 touchdowns. I took the under 40 touchdowns. Randy took the over. Part of that was just kind of a fun thing where he really felt like, this Giants offense with these receivers was going to take off, and their lack of a running game was going to kind of make them into a dynamic passing team. But Eli Manning has never really been dynamic, ever. Even in these great playoff games and everything, his defense kept him in a lot of those playoff games, and then to his credit, he's fourth quarter clutch, but he's never really gone out and just blown teams away with his arm. He's had a few nice games here and there, but he's not a fantasy stud by any stretch of the imagination. And right now, he has an Odell Beckham and a Sterling Shepard. Those are 2 of the better weapons in the NFL. And it was coming in against a Green Bay passing defense that was definitely suspect and was beat up. And he just didn't do it again. And 18 of 35 for 199 yards. If I'm an Eli Manning owner, I can't justify starting him, especially not in a matchup that looks so favorable going in.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Like they got rid of Tom Coughlin and kept Bob McAdoo because he was supposed to be this. He was going to help Eli Manning. He was going to do all this for them. And then you don't see any of it. In fact, his numbers are better last year at this point. And they had less of a defense. So
they started the season 2-0. Now they've lost 3 in a row, and they are an arrow pointing down the running game right now for New York. Just to get back on the fantasy track here, 5 carries for Bobby Rainey, 22 yards. Orleans Darkwa, 7 carries for 11 yards. I actually mentioned Darkwa a couple weeks ago. I thought he would have a chance to kind of take over this job just because I like his running style. He is a bull, but the Packers were ready for him and pretty much everything else that New York tried to run at them. They had a little bit of success through the air, but Sterling Shepard was absent. 2 catches for 14 yards. Odell Beckham had 12 targets to Shepard's 7. Did find the end zone, like you said, for 56 yards. But this game, to me, was a game that I felt like New York could match up with Green Bay. I thought that more points would get put on the board. I did feel like Green Bay would win the game, but I thought New York could hang some numbers on them, and they just didn't do it. So for me, it's hard to justify starting anybody on the Giants outside of Odell Beckham, and that includes Sterling Shepard. unless you need a flex guy.
I mean, for Green Bay, you still got the Eddie Lacy question of, yeah, he gets you 81 yards before he gets out, so maybe he was on track for a 100-yard game. I mean, which one of these receiver? I mean, do you kind of play all the receivers, and where are you stopping, drawing that line with the Packers?
I still like Jordy Nelson. I mean, what's not to like? The guy gets a touchdown every week. His numbers as far as yardage not so great, only 38 yards. But getting the touchdown was great. Devontae Adams finally showed up, as did Randall Cobb. But Green Bay is another team that's just lacked consistency this season. I don't believe Aaron Rodgers has thrown for 300 yards yet this year. He did finally break his streak of not having a quarterback rating over 100 last week against Detroit. But prior to that, he had the longest current streak in the NFL of not having a QB rating over 100. Alex Smith now holds that honor because Rodgers finally broke that streak. But they just look out of sorts. And I'm not so sure that it's not because their style, they haven't adjusted their style going forward. They kind of had Aaron Rodgers come in, and he was a dominant quarterback for a while, and it almost seems like teams are starting to figure out Green Bay, and they're getting a little stale, in my opinion. They've gotten stale on offense. And, Eddie Lacy with only 11 carries, yes, he had 81 yards, but why is James Starks, did Lacy get hurt? I didn't see the end of that game.
Yes, he did get hurt.
Okay, so that's why James Starks had so many carries. Yeah, because Lacy was averaging over 7 yards a carry. This is scary to me as far as Green Bay goes, outside of Jordy Nelson, in that Aaron Rodgers just hasn't been warranting that number 2, number 3 quarterback position that people expected from him when they drafted him. He was a top 4 quarterback. In a lot of places, he was a 1, 2, or 3 QB, and he hasn't been putting up great numbers. And I would be concerned as a Lacy owner. I would be concerned as a Rodgers owner, as a Randall Cobb owner, although Randall Cobb did have a good week this week. There's just so much inconsistency there outside of Jordy Nelson.
Yeah, certainly. That's something we have to obviously keep monitoring, but Eddie Lacy's just been that problem for the past, like just last year as well, and then coming into this year, same thing. So I think that's going to do it for covering the games here, the recap edition for Fantasy Football to the Max. I mean, make sure you check out WTMnet.com. Sorry we've been slow on getting the football stuff up. The change and what's going on is, and we had a couple guys out because of the storm, and Gary's out on a cruise, so we kind of been shorthanded. That's not been helping.
I'm just glad you guys made it through Hurricane Matthew without any terrible things that happened. And for those of you that did, our hearts are with you, and we hope that you guys can get your lives back in order down that way.
Certainly. So until we see you again on Thursday, later, everybody.
The following podcast is a W2M Network original production. Visit W2Mnet.com for all of our other great podcasts, plus news, reviews, articles, and opinions from the worlds of wrestling, video games, football, and entertainment.